Last weekend I was in West Virginia to visit with my dad and take him to a medical procedure. And after he came out of the anesthesia and received a pretty good report from his doctor, we stopped by his UU church on our way back to the retirement community where he lives. While he was in the office at the church taking care of some treasurer business, I had just happened to run into an old friend of mine from high school who is a member of his church now. And we started chatting. My friend, it turns out, has become a very active community advocate. And she began telling me what was going on in Charleston, West Virginia these days. She told me that she has been receiving phone call after phone call for the last 2 weeks from women who are seeking assistance as West Virginia's total ban on abortions has gone into effect. Worries about the legal ramifications of helping these people were weighing heavy on her mind. And she was certain that the situation there and in many parts of the country was only going to get more dire and complicated as the year goes on. You know, summer is usually a time for ministers to vacation, to enjoy some time. But this year, it has been pretty difficult to just tune out and relax. Draconian Supreme Court decisions, horrific mass shooting after mass shooting, the continued threats to our democracy, and the news of new strains of COVID on the way. With all this swirling around in my mind, I sat down this week to write a sermon on different people's beliefs about God. In this world with all its suffering and injustice, where need and hurt and pain are very immediate for very many of us, talking about theology can feel a little disconnected and theoretical. It seems like staying in our heads and intellectualizing while the world is burning down around us. Now, we Unitarian Universalists like to say that we are a religion that is about deeds and not creeds. And we aspire to follow William Ellery Channing's famous words that we let our lives preach more loudly than our lips. For us as liberal religious people, our shared values matter much more than what we profess to believe about God. Holding a particular theology isn't a prerequisite for belonging in this community, and we are proud of our diversity. But while all this is true, it does not mean that what we believe does not matter. Theology can be a purely academic and conceptual endeavor, just a bunch of concepts living in our heads if we choose to approach it that way. But theology can also be a powerful and relevant exercise if it is done correctly. Theology is really just simply about naming and claiming what it is that we call on to give us strength and resilience in times of trouble. It's the work of connecting our heads to our hearts and making what we value, what we love, what we hope for, into more than just an idea or a disembodied thought. Theology makes these things into a reality that we can grab a hold of, that we can hang on to when we need them most. So today I want to talk about and explore with you a little theology. On a Sunday morning many years ago at another church in a distant state that I served, I presented a service about defining what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. Instead of a sermon, what I did was I offered up a long list of things, of people, of different beliefs. And I asked the congregation to decide if each one of them was UU or not you. Now, some of the statements in this exercise were pretty easy, right? The group was pretty unanimous in their agreement that eternal damnation is not you. And that our Unitarian Universalist Association president, Susan Frederick Gray, pretty much, well, she was you. But then we got to some harder ones. I said this statement. Now think about this for yourselves. God is an old man that lives in the sky. You, or not you. Now it turns out that that particular congregation, by a pretty much majority, said that they thought that that was not you. I told them I thought you really could be you, and believe that. You didn't have to be. You didn't have to believe that to be you. But there are certainly lots of theists within our tradition, within our movement, and even within this congregation. Now, everybody in the group pretty much agreed that we could say there is no God, and that would be you. But there was some question about whether the statement, there are many gods, did that belong in you, or was that not you? Now, the group was divided about that last one. I think it's interesting that it was about 50-50. Is it you or not you? A belief in many gods. I think that the division of opinion there came from some of our history, or the way we're taught our history. I think it's fascinating. And, of course, my answer to that question was, of course you can believe in many gods and be a you. There are many Unitarian Universalists that do. But I think that our aversion to polytheism comes out of how we have been taught our history, and how we still hold on to the original meanings of that word, Unitarian. Now, today here at All Peoples, whether we use the word God or not, whether we call ourselves theists or atheists or agnostic or spiritual or just none of the above, many of us have this core belief that behind all of our differences in theology and practice, there's got to be one common truth, one shared ultimate reality. For many of us, our ability to respect and promote religious freedom is grounded in this sense that there's at least some kind of unity, some kind of oneness happening. The Unitarian Universalist theologian Forrest Church famously described our approach to faith as a belief in one light coming through many windows. In his book, Cathedral of the World, Church uses this metaphor of one light through many windows to describe our affirmation that each religious path or belief system is just a different way of seeing and experiencing the same light, the one common source of it all. The windows are not the light. They are only portals to it. And we would say that no window has a monopoly on the light. But we would probably, at least in his metaphor, say that there is still only one light behind them all. Now, I really love Forrest Church's metaphor, but I do wonder about it. And today I want to suggest to you that we may want to reconsider such notions. If we step back for a minute and we return to my original premise, that theology must be more than an exercise in reason and thought, and that it should instead be the work of naming and claiming what we rely on, what sustains us, what we need, what connects our heads to our hearts, then perhaps, just maybe, having multiple gods might make quite a bit of sense. It might actually be a very Unitarian Universalist way to be. In recent years, a large percentage of Americans have embraced this idea that there can be alternative facts. How many of y'all have heard that? How many of y'all have cringed when you heard that? It has become very clear through our elections, through our pandemic, that many of our neighbors are not at all on the same page about what's happening in our world and how we are called to respond and to live together as we are. History has shown us that one of the ways that we get ourselves in the most trouble is when we assume that we already know what other people need, what other people rely on, what makes meaning and gives life value for somebody else. If God is simply our human way of personifying our needs and our hopes and our desires, then insisting that there's only one God, only one light behind all those windows, might not really help us connect across our differences and experiences at all. It might not give us the freedom to find the light that we really most authentically need. Religious history professor Ramdas Lamb has written extensively about the differences between monotheistic religions and polytheistic traditions. In his book on world religions, Lamb identifies several important characteristics that all polytheistic traditions share, all traditions which affirm multiple gods. Among these are the belief that each god or divinity holds a special function, a specific power that relates to a certain part of our human experience. These gods represent everything from physical forces like rain and thunder and the seasons, to human emotions like love and jealousy, generosity or anger. They all exist in relationship to one another, just as such forces and emotions exist together within our human souls. Polytheism frees us to worship and show devotion to whichever or whatever God embodies what we need and we hope most right now. And then the freedom to move on to other gods and sources when our needs and our hopes change. Interestingly, Lamb points out that polytheism is most prevalent in societies and cultures where community is highly valued over individualism, and power is shared among people because it is acknowledged that everyone has something specific to contribute. While monotheism, he says, and the belief in a single all-powerful God arose in societies defined by monarchies, dictatorships, and ruling elites, where belonging to the right tribe, the right belief system is essential to one's social dignity and worth. These belief systems reflect the way we see and relate to each other. That top-down God of most Western religions is very different than the it takes a village polytheistic model of pagan, earth-centered, or Hindu traditions. Something to think about, I think, especially in relationship to our Unitarian Universalist values. For those among us who struggle with the idea of one God at all, let alone the idea of there being many gods, perhaps there's a way to consider all of this differently and to go back to the way that we define theology. Again, if theology is about making what sustains us, what we rely on, what we believe in, into more concrete reality, putting bones on our hope, imagining that the love we seek, what it looks like and sounds like and feels like, then maybe many gods who specialize works better than one God trying to do it all. Maybe many gods, each of which elevates a particular human characteristic into sacred forms, works better than no God at all. I know that for me, there are many moments just this past week, when to be the person that I really want to be, what I have needed most has been patience. And bowing down before that God of patience, giving patience a name and a form and a reality, might have helped me to actually feel it more deeper and not just sit around wishing that I was more patient. In hearing about the violence in Highland Park and Uvalde and Buffalo, witnessing the continued carnage in Ukraine, grieving the shooting death of Jalen Walker in Akron, what I need most with all that going on is probably to let go of my own experience and find a way to really connect and honor someone else's experience, someone else's suffering. What I need in those kind of moments is a God that isn't a whole lot of different things, but a God that is just simply compassion. Compassion and nothing else. What I need is compassion to take over my mind and my heart and push all those other gods out of the way for a while. It is extremely hard to be kind and patient and loving and courageous and wise and generous and hopeful all at the same time. It is hard because there's also fear and anger and despair and hurt in us too. To me, polytheism is a way of allowing ourselves to focus, to ask that deep question, what is it that I really need to be, to embody, to take that next step towards changing and growing on my path of life? Polytheism speaks to the multiplicity of our experience. It is a way of making all that different stuff, all of it, holy. Now, I got to tell you that I'm not quite willing to let go completely of that beautiful metaphor of Forest Church, of that one light and the many windows. It's just beautiful. I still hang on to this belief that down deep there's got to be something that we all share, something that's holding it all together. But I am also willing to consider what our cathedral might look like and be like if there were many lights and many windows, just as there are many hopes and many needs within me and within you. This week I encourage you to explore and to learn more about ways of imagining theology that may not be that familiar to you. Stretching and growing. How we see ourselves, how we find meaning. That is what being a UU is all about. As Mr. Wolfenden said in our reading, the truth is that people who live good, compassionate lives of service to others are living the holy life, no matter what name they may use, no matter what ideas they may hold about God. So may it be with us.